This morning, we begin with a local lawmaker's front row seat to history. U.S. Representative Madeleine Dean sits on the powerful Judiciary Committee. The committee drafted the formal articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. The impeachment trial now in the hands of the Senate. Madeleine Dean represents Pennsylvania's 4th congressional district. It includes most of Montgomery County. Born and raised in Glenside, Dean spent 6.5 years in the Pennsylvania State House before winning her congressional seat. In addition to the judiciary, Dean sits on the Financial Services Committee, along with several caucuses, including the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, Equality Caucus, and the Bipartisan Women's Caucus. NBC10 political reporter Lauren Mayk is sitting down with the Congresswoman right now about her role on the judiciary. Lauren.
Thanks, Erin, and welcome, Congresswoman Dean.
Thank you.
You sit on the House Judiciary Committee, which put together a lot of this case that we are now seeing play out in the Senate impeachment trial. So how confident are you in the case that the House sent over to the Senate?
Very confident, and we're seeing that confidence in the facts and the damning evidence borne out in this trial as prepared by the House managers led by Adam Schiff and, of course, Jerry Nadler of Judiciary. What we found and what we voted on by impeaching this president is that he abused his office in the most serious of ways. For personal political gain, he tried to shake down a foreign leader who was in desperate need of our foreign aid that we had passed for the benefit in the upcoming election. America knows that that is not what a president should do with his power, and so he was impeached for that.
We're seeing the House managers play clips from hearings that happened in the House.
Yes.
Take us behind the scenes a little bit to what you were thinking and your colleagues were thinking. When was the moment that you thought, we have our case?
Well, it was an accumulation of evidence, but certainly what happened, what tipped the scales, was the courageous whistleblower who came forward and said that he or she had come face to face with evidence that the president had a very improper phone call with President Zelensky, asking for a favor, though, withholding aid, foreign aid to that country that is under attack by Russia. The whistleblower complaint was certainly the tipping point.
And that was very early on. That was before a lot of these testimonies that we heard from Gordon Sondland and Ambassador Volker and others.
Sure. The call took place, and the president, of course, released the record of the call, which was extraordinarily telling. The call took place on July the 25th. It was September that the whistleblower came forward. And then, of course, the record of the call released by the president, in his own words, showing that what he wanted was a foreign leader to cook up a fake investigation of his political rival, Joe Biden.
So how did all of this, how did we get here, basically? As you heard about that call, read the notes from the call, started to put together the information that you were getting, who were you still trying to convince? Were you having to convince Speaker Pelosi? I know she didn't start out thinking that impeachment was the right way to go.
I hope what people see is this was an extraordinarily thoughtful process on the part of each individual member of Congress. And I say that in particular about my caucus. People came to different conclusions at different times. There was certain evidence that came forward. I, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, felt that I was on the front lines. And so when Attorney General Barr, back in May, refused to come forward and comply with a legal subpoena from Congress, that concerned me greatly. And then shortly after that, Don McGahn failed to come forward. It was literally at that point, just to give you from my perspective, that I went to my leadership and said, I believe that as a member of this committee, seeing the dereliction of duty and disobeyance of law with these members not coming and obeying a subpoena, I said to my leadership, I am going to call for an impeachment inquiry. Others came to it at different times.
What was that conversation like when were you speaking with Speaker Pelosi at that point?
I first spoke to the other members of our leadership team. I asked for a personal meeting with her for two reasons. One, I wanted to argue in favor of some legislation, some amendments that I got about PFAS water contamination that affects my district. And I urged her to continue to fight for that in the National Defense Authorization Act, which she did very vehemently. But we also had the chance to talk about impeachment. You saw her thoughtfulness. She came to impeachment only after the Ukraine record of the call. And I wanted to say to her, even though I have asked for impeachment inquiry, I am not at odds at all with your strategy and your thinking, because you have something much larger to do. she had to shepherd an entire caucus in a Congress.
Did she express concern about what the ramifications would be for potentially your colleagues in swing districts?
She expressed concerns for the country. That was her greatest concern, and I think remains her greatest concern. Every single time she has talked about this, whether it's one-on-one with me or other colleagues, or in caucus, or you see publicly, she says she's worried about our Constitution, our precious democracy, that we must consider this with sobriety and somberness. This is an extraordinary place to have to take the country, but as she has said, the president left us no other choice. He abused his office, abused his power for personal political gain. He invited foreign interference in our election, having learned nothing from what our intelligence officers have all told us. Russia interfered with the 2016 election. What did this president do? He was emboldened. The day after Mueller testified before our committee and intelligence committee, he picked up the phone to President Zelensky and said, "I'll need you to do us a favor, though."
As the House put together their case, there were things that you didn't get. For example, testimony from John Bolton and some documents. And there is criticism right now, both from the president's attorneys and also from some Republicans, that stuff wasn't gotten before the case came over to the Senate, and that the House did not do everything it could, including going to the courts, in order to get it. So do you stand by the decision to send it over without that stuff?
It's an extraordinary argument to be made by this administration and his attorneys. It is the very fact that Article 2 was produced. It is a president who obstructed at every turn the investigation into his wrongdoing. As soon as he was caught having this inappropriate conversation and having this Giuliani domestic political errand going on, as soon as he was caught, he made sure we got nothing. We were blocked categorically from all documents. The president provided no documents and no witnesses.
But was anyone saying, perhaps in the Judiciary Committee or in the Intelligence Committee, was anyone saying, you know, maybe we should go through the courts? Was anyone pushing back and advocating for doing everything you could?
Well, actually, we did go through the courts, and we continue in the courts. So, for example, I'll give the case of Don McGahn. I told you back in May, Don McGahn failed to show for his subpoena, and the president and the administration claimed a blanket immunity, which simply does not exist. We went to court on that. That case is still in court. The determination was made 8 months later, late last year, that Don McGahn should come forward. He must come forward. They appealed that. So we're doing both. We're litigating, we're legislating, but part of the problem of saying wait for the courts is that to wait for the courts would not recognize the urgency of the problem.
Some other issues aside from impeachment, when you initially ran for Congress, you and a lot of your Democratic colleagues in 2018 ran on health care.
Yes.
The issue of health care. So now that you have been in office, how is the health care situation for Americans better than it was when you ran?
Well, thank you for asking that, because this is a Congress, the 116th Congress, the most diverse Congress in our nation's history, more women than ever before. You know, here in Pennsylvania, we went from 0 women in our federal delegation to 4. I'm happy to serve with those other women. We have been legislating. We have not just been obsessed with impeachment. We have an obligation to do oversight, but we also have an obligation to legislate. I am so proud of the 400 bills that this House majority, the new majority, has passed. Our number one issue was health care. We passed a package of bills. It's House Bill 987. That is a package of bills about getting greater access to health care, more affordable prescription drugs, more affordable premiums, making sure generics get to market more quickly. And this is in the face of this administration, who came right out of the gate wanting to tear down the ACA. We had to join a lawsuit to try to protect the Affordable Care Act.
But I'm talking about there are bills that the House has passed, certainly,
yes,
that the Senate has not picked up.
Yes.
So what has gotten through? What has changed in health care since you all came to Washington with that as a priority?
Well, I think what has changed is that this is a Democratic majority interested in protecting health care, and we are coming up a wall of both the administration and the dereliction of duty by Mitch McConnell to take up this legislation and debate it.
Is that good enough for people, though? People are looking for the change, and regardless of whose fault it is in Washington, what can get done? So far, what can you do next year?
Well, what we do every single day is work with our constituents to make sure that they are getting the health care that they need. So that's the other part. We litigate, we legislate, but we also serve our constituents. So we help our constituents with open enrollment, making sure they are a part of the Affordable Care Act, and making sure they know that we are making these cases. But leaders matter, and it is important to say that we call upon the Senate to debate these bills about health care. Do they want to protect pre-existing conditions for their constituents, for themselves and their family members, or do they want to sit on their hands? Of the 400 bills that we have passed out of this Congress, 285 of them were bipartisan, and yet 85% sit dead in the Senate. That's important for people to know, for constituents to know. They need to evaluate what leaders are standing up to protect them, for the people, for their health care, and what leaders are sitting on their hands.
Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Aaron, we'll send back to you.